The relentless onslaught of the Russian army continued unabated. Preparations were underway for yet another assault on Ukrainian soil. A Russian infantry fighting vehicle, IFV, rumbled onto the battlefield, spitting fire at Ukrainian positions. It then charged into the village, unleashing a hail of bullets in every direction. Reaching its designated point, the IFV disgorged its infantry. A Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, a silent sentinel in the sky, spotted approximately 10 soldiers in the area and relayed the vital information back to command. The Russian army began its preparations for the impending attack. Gathering their equipment, the infantrymen established defensive positions amidst the skeletal ruins of houses. No civilians remained. Ukraine had withdrawn its own troops, ceding the village, for now, to the Russian. Little did they know, their every move was being scrutinized by the unwavering eye of the Ukrainian reconnaissance drone. After a careful inspection and clearing of the area, the Russian soldiers unloaded weapons, extra ammunition, and other essential equipment, digging in to fortify their defenses. The Ukrainian drone operators, witnesses to this scene, felt not fear, but a surge of anticipation, a hunter's thrill. They were ready to meet the expected wave of Russian attacks. Just one drone-delivered payload could obliterate the building where the Russian soldiers were huddled. Then, the Ukrainian artillery roared to life. Guided by the unerring precision of the reconnaissance drone, the shells slammed into the houses sheltering the Russian infantry. After that barrage, silence reigned. The Ukrainian command acted swiftly, decisively. It was time for a counterattack, to wrest the village back from the enemy's grasp. The plan was meticulously crafted, every detail accounted for. Several assault groups were formed for the counterattack, each assigned a specific objective. Combat vehicles surged forward, successfully disembarking their troops and engaging the enemy. The Russian army, caught off guard and outnumbered, found itself overwhelmed by the relentless Ukrainian forces. To deny the enemy any chance of entrenching themselves, of finding cover amidst the rubble, the Ukrainian army rained explosives down upon the shattered houses. The following day, the Russian army launched another attack on a Ukrainian village. This force consisted of a tank and 2 armored personnel carriers, APCs. But fate, or perhaps a well-placed mine, intervened. The tank, leading the charge, detonated the explosive device and was consumed in flames. The APCs, cautiously maneuvering around the wreckage, skirted the minefield and reached the village, deploying their troops. The Russians hoped to find refuge within the village, a springboard for their continued offensive. However, the Ukrainians swiftly neutralized the APCs after they discharged their human cargo. Ukraine had transformed the village into an inescapable death trap for the Russian army. Every armored vehicle that dared to enter the village met its end, destroyed by Ukrainian FPV drones. Even the disabled tank, victim of the mine, was ultimately reduced to a smoldering husk by these deadly drones. Of all the armored vehicles dispatched by Russia to the village, not a single one escaped unscathed. All were obliterated by the unwavering Ukrainian army. Every Russian armored vehicle venturing onto Ukrainian territory was under constant surveillance. Drones were a persistent, lurking threat. A mine could bring any advance to a sudden, explosive halt. The Ukrainian side maintained a vigilant watch, their eyes unblinking. Several precision strikes left Russia reeling, with no recourse. The Russian APCs were reduced to nothing more than twisted, burning scrap metal. Then, another APC attempted to breach the village's defenses, seemingly hoping for better luck than its predecessors. Almost immediately, a Ukrainian F-soldier locked onto the target. Moments later, a colossal explosion ripped through the air, sending the APC's debris and turret hurtling dozens of feet. One of the APCs did manage to offload its infantry into a building, but it was a fatal mistake, a preordained trap. The drone operator wasted no time in acquiring a lock on the doomed target, and an FPV drone intercepted the target as it desperately tried to escape. Realizing the futility of their advance, the Russian APCs turned to flee, but a Ukrainian soldier unleashed a javelin missile. However, the others managed to escape. This Ukrainian soldier changed the situation. It was a precise mortar strike. The Russian attack was a complete failure. Meanwhile, the Russian troops that had been deployed earlier sought refuge in the crumbling ruins of buildings. But the fragile walls of the devastated houses offered no sanctuary. This time, it was the Ukrainian tanks' turn to assume the role of executioner. With pinpoint accuracy, the tanks demolished the Russian hideouts. This village was a crucial defensive position, and Ukraine would not allow Russia to operate within its boundaries without a brutal, uncompromising fight. In addition to the tanks, Ukrainian FPV drones also participated in the task of destroying the buildings. Then, the final attack ended with a Ukrainian soldier firing an RPG-7 rocket. The building collapsed from all sides. Russia is completely helpless. Currently, Ukraine is facing about 470,000 Russian troops attacking its positions daily with infantry assault groups. If Ukraine had enough artillery, these attacks could be easily repelled because just a few shells can quickly neutralize attackers as soon as they began to move from their positions. However, Ukraine has been forced to limit its artillery units to firing only 2,000 shells a day with a range of 750 miles. Ukraine has deployed about 350 guns, making them nearly unusable in many areas of Ukraine's front line. The Russian military has also complained of running out of ammunition. However, Ukrainian military commanders say Russian shell supplies to frontline units appear to be much more effective than their own supply. Artillery accounts for about 80% of casualties on both sides. However, a lack of production capacity in Europe has led to shell shortages that could be disastrous for Ukraine's war effort. Ammunition shortages have been felt across the front line and contributed to the recent withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from several cities. Ukraine's frontline troops are facing a shortage of artillery shells and have had to scale back some military operations due to a lack of foreign aid. Due to the lack of ammunition, some frontline artillery units are only allowed to fire 1 or 2 rounds a day. The mechanized brigade in eastern Ukraine is only allowed to fire 2 rounds at Russian forces a day, compared to 20 or 30 previously. The ammunition shortage comes as the Ukrainian army prepares for a spring offensive. President Zelensky has said that President Zelensky has said that the much-discussed offensive hinges on a critical lifeline, a surge of Western weaponry. Without a sufficient stockpile of ammunition, the Ukrainian army is forced into a grim calculus, spreading its forces thin across the front line, absorbing the brunt of the Russians' relentless small arms fire. This translates to a surge in casualties, a heartbreaking attrition of its ranks, and a crippling reduction in the number of troops available to pull back, retrain, and prepare for the offensive operations so vital to reclaiming lost ground. In essence, absent a robust supply of artillery shells, Ukraine faces the agonizing prospect of a slow, grinding descent into a fixed defensive posture, surrendering territory inch by agonizing inch, a fate already unfolding in certain sectors. Yet, even as the shadow of artillery shortage looms, NATO has flexed its considerable muscle, launching Dragon 24, its largest military exercise since the chilling days of the Cold War. Tens of thousands of troops are now deployed across the European continent, a potent show of force meticulously designed to send a clear and unmistakable warning to Russia in the wake of its brutal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Dragon 24 forms a crucial component of the even larger Steadfast Defender 24 exercise, a colossal undertaking not witnessed since the Cold War's tense standoff. This exercise involves approximately 90,000 troops, spanning until May, and showcases a formidable naval armada of over 50 warships, ranging from imposing aircraft carriers to nimble destroyers. The skies will be patrolled by more than 80 fighter jets, helicopters, and drones, alongside at least 1,100 combat aircraft, including a ground force of 133 tanks and 533 infantry fighting vehicles. NATO has resolutely condemned Russia's brutal and unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, a stance reinforced by unwavering support. NATO and its allies continue to provide unprecedented levels of assistance to Ukraine, empowering it to uphold its fundamental right to self-defense against the aggressor. Just this week, NATO cemented its commitment by signing a massive $1.2 billion contract for the purchase of approximately 220,000 artillery shells. The alliance has declared its intention to deliver these critical shells to Ukraine, answering its urgent pleas regarding ammunition shortages, or alternatively, to member states seeking to replenish their depleted stockpiles after supplying Ukrainian forces. NATO is playing a pivotal role in helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression by diligently coordinating Ukrainian requests for assistance and actively supporting allies in their provision of crucial humanitarian and non-lethal aid. NATO has unequivocally identified Russia as the most serious and immediate threat to the security of its members, a designation underscored by unwavering vigilance. Since Russia initiated its full-scale invasion in February 2022, the United States has committed approximately $75 billion in military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Complementing this substantial contribution, other NATO allies and partners have collectively provided over $100 billion in assistance. In total, NATO allies account for a staggering 99% of all military aid flowing into Ukraine, solidifying their unified stance. Western supply routes to Ukraine, however, remain long and arduous, often finding themselves targeted by Russian missiles and drones, creating a perilous gauntlet. Yet, weapons experts emphasize that the core problem lies within the limitations of Western arms factories, struggling to produce sufficient ammunition to sustain the intense warfare now raging along largely static fronts. This deficiency compels both armies to rely heavily on artillery, not only to fortify their positions, but also to provide essential support for infantry attacks. Should the United States agree to continue funding Ukraine, approximately 1.3 million rounds are anticipated to reach the front lines by 2024, allowing Ukrainian to maintain its position, partially thanks to European investments in expanding production capabilities. Supplies could become even more abundant by 2025, potentially reaching levels sufficient to support sustained offensive operations. However, with Europe still actively building up its production capacity, Ukraine will continue to grapple with a severe supply shortfall in the immediate months ahead unless the United States acts. Despite its current advantage, the Russians' weapons superiority may wane over time. While ammunition production could potentially increase, the Russian has relied heavily on imported ammunition from the old Soviet stockpile system. By 2025, these stockpiles will be largely depleted, and Russia's capacity to domestically produce sufficient ammunition may prove inadequate to meet its future needs. Consequently, by 2025, the accuracy and availability of Russian weapons may begin to decline. This potential shift offers Ukraine and its allies a glimmer of hope for the long term. However, the crucial question remains, is the United States prepared to sustain this fight into the coming year, allowing Ukraine to weather the storm until the tide potentially turns in its favor?